side of the river. The carpenters came in 1801. It was with his wife. Is when the first people came to the area. And by 1813, we know that there was at least a settlement up here in what they called Middlebury instead of Powell. Powell came later, the name did. And in fact, the name came in 1857 when we got a post office. And the post office, is that better? And the post office we were able to obtain because of a gentleman, a judge from Delaware whose name was Powell. So we thanked him by naming our area Powell. Then also, hi, come join us. Later on, a significant date was 1875, and that was because the railroad came through. So I'll tell you more about that on our trip. So let's get our very first stop, and you are looking at a two-story brick house, a brick building, I should say. It has been a house before, but it was still as a school in Liberty Township, which that's what our historical society covers, which includes the little town of Hyatt. There were 11 one-room schoolhouses, and this building was built in 1876. The school districts were formed by the trustees in 1826. So we had these one-room schoolhouses until this one was built in 1876 and incorporated several of the our area's one-room schools. This was a great improvement. It was progress. There were grades 1 through 4 on one of the floors and 5 through 8 on the other floor. And there were no high schools at that time. If a child wanted to go, or people wanted to go on for high school, then there were opportunities for them to take Boxwell examinations. I am not real clear on all that included, except that it was a way for the rural children who did not have as many possibilities as those in the towns to further their education. And so this brick house or brick building, like I said, had lower and upper. It was known as a grader school, offering normal school courses. Normal is a title. And the Boxwell examinations, which were for teacher prep and high school, was offered. In 1898, there was a desire for an actual high school. There was no building for it. So the ones who wanted to go on with high school actually went to a couple different places here in town. The church. They also went to where the little barber shop in town, the little white building is. They had school in there a couple times. They went over to Hyatt's, to the Redmond Lodge a little bit. So there were a couple years there, just at the very end of the century and the beginning of the new one, where the students could take these high school courses. One year there were 2 graduates, so it wasn't a lot of people. This building was sold after it no longer was the school, and it was turned into the home, and there were different people that lived in this building. There's a gentleman here today. Where are you, Cliff? He had relatives. He had relatives that lived in it. So anyway, that is the information about the school. We had school buses, and they were horse-drawn. And we have neat pictures of them back at our Historical Society. I will tell you, too, that actually the first real settlement of this area was this South Liberty Street. And at the time, it was called Middlebury, which is what the town was called, Middlebury. And the old maps show that they made a space, or gave a space for schools. They had a space for churches. So the first church started down here on South Liberty too. When we get around the corner, you'll see that church building, and it's not on South Liberty. So we'll keep you guessing on that. Rail service along 23, known as the CD&M, Columbus, Delaware, and Marion. And it was the electric cars. And so the story is that George would take his horse and team to the 23 stop at the end of Powell Road, and he would bring some of the travelers home here. And it was sort of a bed and breakfast. And Candace would cook, and they would sleep here and spend the night. And so this is kind of an early bed and breakfast. Let's see, the CD&M Interurban Electric Trolley ran until the 1930s, and it was constructed in 1901, so it didn't have a real long run. But there are also lots of, if you even want to look online, you can look up the CD&M Interurban and find out more about what that stands for.
International Order of Odd Fellows.
Independent Order of Odd Fellows. It was built as the second Odd Fellow Lodge, and it was built in 1890. The first one was built on the opposite side on North Liberty, and it was built 20 years before that but burned. And so this is the second Odd Fellow Hall, and it was always used, rented out in the bottom floor as a mom and pop market. So different people owned it through the years. One owned it the longest and was just, she just was Powell. Was named Clara Bell Landstrom after Mr. Bell died. And this was the corner store that everybody came to. And it wasn't until the 80s that she left it. It's been different groceries and then also different restaurants since then. Right now it's Craft House No. 5. This building was also built as a lodge. It was the Knights of Pythias. It's a two-story frame, built in 1906. I should have said the other lodge, the Odd Fellows, and this one also had women's auxiliaries. So the women did have their night at lodge as well. This was also run, the basement, or I should say the first floor, as a market. It was called the Red and White Store for most of my growing up years, and it was run by Fred Reeves. Fred Reeves will be a name in our Powell history that you'll see and hear a lot of. He not only was the proprietor here of the market, he became our first fire chief, and he was also Santa, and he just did a lot for the town. So this is also an important building as far as lodges are concerned. I should tell you too that when they disbanded the Odd Fellow Lodge, our historical society became the beneficiary of many other things. We have some pieces in the house that were in the lodge. They also gave us quite a bit of money, which we certainly appreciated, and the flagpole that you will see out in front of the Martin Perry House was one of the stipulations that we used the money at least for that. So we very much appreciated the Odd Fellows. I mentioned earlier about the railroad as an important date in 1875. Well, a little bit before that, and in the 1830s, a gentleman by the name of Thomas Hall was deeded property here in this area, and it is believed that he had the first store, corner store, where Jenny's Ice Cream is right now. He lived in a small house to the right of this building. When he died in and in fact, Powell was called Hall's Corners because of that little store in those years. Now, when he died, one of his sons, Asa Gordon Hall, bought the brothers out, bought the family property. They had farm buildings across the street, and it was Asa Gordon who built this house. And in 1875, when he heard that the railroad was coming through, he heard that they were going to place those tracks east of the center of town. Well, he owned all this property to the west, and so he said to Columbus Toledo Railroad Company, I will deed you land, the right through my land, if you will place it west of the town center. And that is where it is today. and that is why it's there. Now, when a railroad is established in your area, then you become prosperous. It is a time when people can get in and out, goods can get in and out, and that is when Asa Gordon said, okay, it's time to have this area surveyed and platted and recorded as a true town. And so 1875 is the date of the platting and recording of the town. We do also have, and I have here too, a picture of the plat map. You can see the names of the little streets and the outlots and the inlots on here. So it's kind of fun to look at, especially when you see how much Powell has grown. And this is how it started. This building, as well as the Halls living here, as you can tell, they were pretty prosperous people in that day. But later, in later days, this building was used a lot for different doctors, physicians. And there have been a couple different physicians that have been here. Dr. Talley was an early doctor, a Dr. Bennington, who also had offices in Worthington when I was a little girl in the 50s. So this house is the Hall House. Now, because of that, when you see the name of the street that leads back to City Hall, you'll understand that it's not for City Hall. It's for the Hall family. So let's take a walk down that street. Very pleased that the city leaders decided to put this historic piece right here in front of their City Hall. And remember, I told you that the four corners up there, which is what we lovingly called them at the time that I was a kid, and most people did call it that, for many years had no stop sign, no stoplight. And so one day there was a little girl who was riding her bike or walking along, and one of those early cars bumped her and broke her arm. And the gentleman who was the hardware owner, where Jenny's is now, because Thomas Hall's building had been bought by someone else by that time. And I believe it was in the 30s, maybe, yeah, 30s. And the proprietor there said, something's got to be done about this intersection. We can't have kids getting hurt. She had a broken arm. And she happened to be the best friend of his granddaughter. So he was going to make sure that something was done about this. So this is a replica, the wood is, of the sign that was in the center of the road. It was just put in a hole there in the center of the road. But at the top, it actually had this blinking light to slow people down. And it was years and years before we got a stoplight in the center of Powell. For many years, it was just a four-way stop. And you know the traffic that's there now. This lady, you can't see it, I know everybody, but this lady was the best friend and the granddaughter of that person, and she had it in her garage, and one day said, Historical Society ought to have it, and the City Hall put it here. So we appreciate that. All right, we're going to head back up. I was a teenager at the time, and it was a community effort, which I thought was really great. It was built to be a youth center for the church. If you look to your right there, you'll see the church, which I mentioned earlier, and we'll talk about it later. But this was a Methodist church, and this was a youth center for the children. We had Sunday school classes in there, BBS in there. And people who never darkened the doors of the church came out to help with this. So it was a great community effort. We appreciated it. Okay, we're going to turn to our left, keep going up towards on this street today. And it's not up.
You can't what we asked for.
Okay, this building over here is the Crystal Design or Christie's Design. That's a new building. And this was kind of an empty lot here for many a year. And the house to the right of us was the Kirkpatrick home. And this is a story that I just have to tell you. I'm sorry, it's a little long, but it is really worth it. because behind the Kirkpatrick house sat a log cabin. And the log cabin had been moved here from down, actually where the safari land of the zoo is now. And I've got to read this to you. We had a gentleman, a good friend of mine, he actually was my bus driver when I was a teenager, and later I helped him, became like a daughter to him. His name was Craig Askins, and he wrote this memory. George Washington Berry was born, date unknown, to slave parents and held as a slave in the South until the end of the Civil War in 1865. And this black man had lived in the log cabin before it was moved here. He was brought to Delaware County, Ohio, date unknown, by the Neff and Stanberry family to work for them. He lived in the log cabin near what was then known as Monkey Run on the Stansbury farm for many years. Now, do you know where the road no longer allows you to go west to the river? And there is a big double-story brick house there. It's said that Jack Hanna lives there when he comes to be at the zoo. That was Craig Askin's home. And it's his property where down west of the property there was this lane called Monkey Row. And I guess there was that kind of talk even then, back then. So that's where this log cabin had originally sat, west of where the road now bends. Okay. In 1920, when I first knew this Mr. Berry, he lived in a log cabin on the Neff farm, about 500 feet west of our western line fence, and probably 50 or 60 rods north of Powell roads. That's Route 750. In later years, after George died, the cabin was torn down and moved to the Leonard Kirkpatrick home and made into a two-car garage that, at this time of writing, it still stood. It was offered to the Historical Society. We didn't have any place to put it, and so it's been torn down. And it says that George was a large, tall, muscular man. He also was very polite, kind-hearted old gentleman. And whenever he would meet my mother or any ladies of our family, he'd bow and curtsy to them. And every summer he would pick wild blackberries and bring them to my mother, for which she would pay him. When we moved to Powell in 1920, that's the Askins, he had a horse, an open buggy, but not long after that the horse died and his only means of travel was by foot. As a young teenager, I spent considerable time with Uncle George. I would take the farm team of horses and wagon and haul his winter coal from Powell to his cabin. He also would cut wood into lengths on neighboring farms, and I would haul it for him. By then, he would always walk with a cane and take the end of a small log in the other hand and lift more than I could, even as a teenager. And it says, I was told by Bert Dixon about him working with the steam threshing engines. I'll skip that. While threshing wheat one summer on the Stansbury farm, he saw George pick up one 2-bushel sack, which weighed 120 pounds each, in each hand, and set them in a high-wheel grain box wagon. He said that while he was gone after a load of water, George took a sack in each hand and one in his teeth and put all 3 sacks in the wagon at once. That might be urban legend. Uncle George had been a tall, straight, muscular man. At the time I knew him, he was gray, round-shouldered, old gentleman, nearing the century mark. If anyone lived to be 100 years old, he did. He did not know his true age. He always wore charcoal trousers and a shirt, black hat, the hat dented into a round corner saucer-shaped top, and he used to tell how he would dig out tree stumps when clearing the land on the Stansbury farm, and some days he would not get one stump dug out. He received 25 cents a stump. He also liked to fish, and he goes on with another urban legend that I will pass by, a huge fish. Anyway, he also enjoyed playing the violin, And I can remember sitting in the yard on a summer evening and hearing the tune Turkey in the Straw coming across the field. As far as I can remember, he died in the middle or late 20s, and where he was buried or what became of his violin, I will probably never know. But our friendship between the young and the old was an enjoyable one, and one I will always remember. I just think that's a sweet story, and there were very, very few black people in our area. So that is where his cabin ended up, back here on this street. I mentioned to you all when we were sitting around the Hall House that 1875 was that important date for Powell because the railroad was coming. And indeed, you see the railroad tracks here. And the depot was on the opposite side of the tracks, right where the green trees are by the building there. And you might have heard that it was down the street here where the new craft beer is. It wasn't. And it was right here. It's across the railroad tracks, on the west side of the railroad tracks right there. At one point, not too many years ago, there was still a little rubble that you could see. But that's private property, so we're not going to go over there. But let me tell you a little bit about this. This was the Columbus and Toledo Railroad, which was formed in 1872. And again, it was supposed to go through the east side of town, but we got it here, this side. Construction began, get this, in November of 1876, and it was completed, the bed was completed to Marion, and the first run from Columbus to Marion by January of 1877. They were putting them down, and they were really doing it. And the road was totally completed to Toledo Road by July. So they were really building this railroad in a hurry. And by 1881, the Columbus and Toledo had been bought out, the name changed to Hocking Valley. So sometimes you'll see it one way and sometimes the other, but it's the same line. The depot was built, we think, 1878, we're not sure, and just like I have been finding out from the Hyatt station to our north, sometimes there was one little building thrown up that was called the depot, and then it was torn down and another one built. But the one that we actually have pictures of, we don't know for sure, but by 1878 we believe was the real depot. The last run of the passenger trains, because it was passenger as well, also took mail, picked up mail and dropped off mail. The last run was in the 60s, and I was a little girl, and my mother said to me, they're not going to pick up passengers anymore, I'm going to take you a ride on the train. I've never been on the train, though I heard it every day, and so we got on the train, we went as far as Columbus, and my father worked at Jeffrey Manufacturing in Columbus. He met us there and brought us home. But I got to be on the train for the very last time that it was the passengers were picked up. When was the depot torn down? Well, we have a picture where it's still standing in 1962. And I don't really know when it was torn down for sure, but probably not long after that. And then if you want to turn around and look at the road as it goes to the east part of the town, or towards east, you'll see houses that are built on this side, which are older too. We don't have a lot of information yet on them. There's a lot of research to do. I will say right now, as a disclaimer, I don't know it all. We don't know it all. So anybody that's interested in helping us do more research, you're certainly invited. I do know that the next house was a dentist lived there, and as a girl I thought, oh my goodness, we've got professionals in our town, and this is really something. He was rich and he was a dentist. You see how small town we were. But anyway, let's keep going, and we'll stop in front of the old church. Talked about the church site being south of town. This church, well actually this was a Methodist church. Somebody asked me, was it always Methodist? we were all Methodist here. There were no other churches. And this was the Methodist church, and a circuit rider used to come to this area, and the Methodists were formed in 1825, soon after people started coming here. And they used to meet in different homes. One particular is called Jarvis Buell. And then they built a log cabin down on South Liberty, and they christened it Emory Chapel after the circuit rider. Well, I understand that it was built on one side of the road, and the log building was then torn down, and they built a frame one on the other side of the road. And then they built this one. And this one, to my knowledge, was built in 1859. But in 1902, they brought the horses and some logs, and they put this building, up on those logs, and carted this building around the corner and down here, and here it sits today.
What year was that?
1902, when this was moved. Now, when it came here, there was no little room over here. That was added. There was no basement, so there was no overhang here to get down to the basement. That was dug out after it sat there. And at the time that they put this here, there were beautiful stained glass windows that were put in. The stained glass windows were there until, maybe 25 years ago, then the people took it out. So I have wonderful pictures of the building being brought by horses around the square into this place here today.
Wow.
This was the church that I grew up in. When you go just inside the vestibule there, you can look up and there's a hole in the ceiling where the bell rope hung. Every now and then, Jimmy Brown would let us ring it, or we rode it is what we did. And at the top of the steeple, instead of a cross, which most churches have, this church had a hand with a finger pointing to heaven. That hand was fashioned after someone here in the town, and it's still on display at the new Powell Methodist Church, which is east of town. Does anybody go to that church? And have you seen that? Yes, it's on display there. I think that's wonderful. So this church was desanctified in the, let's see, when did that happen? It was desanctified and sold in 1990. And they moved the hand down there at that point. Since then, it's been several different things. It's been a coffee house. It's been a baseball card place. It's been a ballet center. And now it's children's clothing. But this was my church when I was a little girl, and I loved it. So, let's keep going. Well, yeah. This building was a penny candy store. It was run, I better change my sheet here just so I can get everything right. But this couple came to town in 1941, and they had two little girls, and this was just a little 5 and dime, really. And they had the penny candy and everything, and you could get school supplies, you could get pop, you could get a few groceries, you could get all kinds of things here. And it was known as Plumbers because the plumbers owned it. And my mother and father would give my brother and me a nickel for us to put in the offering, and then they would give us a nickel for penny candy on the way home. Now, you must know, my mother and father didn't go to church. But I took my little brother, 6 years younger, and we would stop here, and he could not decide how to spend his 5 pennies until Evelyn, the daughter of the plumbers, would say, "Mike," And so a couple times, this is original. This step is original. I would pull him down these steps, laying on the ground, kicking and screaming, and I'd kick him all the way home and say, don't ever send money with him again. But anyway, this was Plumber's Trading Post, 5 and dime, and lots of penny candy. Lots. This Christmas tree was taller than the one I just mentioned there in front of the church, and it was very slender, but it was so very tall, and the fire department would come and decorate this with great big strands of colored lights. And my neighbor at the time had made a beautiful star to put on the top. And when you were on 23, Route 23, about to come down Powell Hill towards Powell, you could see the top of that tree from 23, which was always very exciting. And under this tree, you know, the brownies, the Girl Scouts, the Boy Scouts, choirs would sing and be here. And the town store operators, like Fred, that was right across the hall, and Clara, that was right over there, would put up money or just donate oranges and candy, and Santa would be here, and that was Fred. And at the Historical Society, we have Fred's Santa suit, including his whiskers and hair and hat that his wife made for him to play Santa. And I could never understand how we could be at Lazarus and I could sit on Santa's lap there, and by the time I got to Powell, Santa was under our tree. I just couldn't get that. Anyway, so this was a pretty neat thing. And if that tree had ever fallen, and they did have to take it down because it was leaning, and we were afraid it would fall. By the way, the Historical Society has a slice of that tree. We tried to preserve it in some way, so we have a slice of it. But this little building next door also is very, very early, and it was built as the first Powell Bank. When I was growing up, we'd get mail that would say, take this to your Powell Bank. And we didn't even have a Powell Bank. You had to go to Worthington or Delaware or something like that. But we have lots of banks today. And this started as a bank, and it was in 1880. And we have some bank notes from 1897. And as I said, in its rooms, actually some of those first people who wanted to have high school went to classes there. At one point, it was a barber shop, and then it became the Powell Post Office. This little tiny place was the Powell Post Office. Now, I got to tell you, the bank vault was inside. It was 2 tons. It had been brought up Powell Hill by horses and set in here. And I used to do these tours and say, that bank vault is in there, it'll never come out. I lied. They opened up the side and took it out, and it's not in there anymore. It's been given to the Historical Society, and what do you do with a 2-ton safe? Anybody have any suggestions? So, anyway, but...
Does anybody want it?
Yeah, does anybody want it? Delivery is on you. Okay. So anyway, we had the post office here for many years, and it was the people in town came to the post office to get their mail. We had delivery outside, rural delivery outside, but this is where you came to get your mail and hear all the gossip. And believe me, in a small town, everybody knew everybody. As a child growing up, I had eyes all over the place. I could not get away with anything because even though it wasn't your mother, somebody would tell her. So, but it was a lot of security and safety in that. Just a lot. And so I had a wonderful childhood here. Okay, we are going to go on down the road. I guess I do need the office finally closed when a new post office was built, which was on South Liberty. And that post office was built in the 70s, I believe it was. And then, of course, now we have the one on Grace Drive that you still have to wait in line a long time for. But anyway, we have a lot more mail today. the place that we're standing now, this brick building, I cannot tell you that Powell became incorporated in 1947. The businessmen had gathered and said, we want some rules here. At this time, there was a racetrack for motorcycles where Murphy's is. And by the way, that was the original site, or a site of the Delaware County Fair, where Murphy's is at one time. And then people by the name of Murphy's bought the land, and they were motorcycle enthusiasts. And so they built the track a little better that had been the horse track to race their motorcycles. Okay, we had motorcycle races here, and then we had stock car races here. And that's the only reason people knew that there was Powell. They were on their way to the races or on their way to the zoo. And so we had one marshal and a deputy, and the marshal did traffic control at that time, but it was dirty and loud. And people were saying, we got to have some rules about this. And so that's when the incorporation started being talked about. So that we could have some rules about the loud and noisy racetrack. And also, they wanted to have some street lights. And so they thought, if we can get incorporated, we can get some street lights. And we really need a fire department, too. And so those were the reasons for the incorporation. And it happened in 1947. And we got these, got street lights, not these, but we got street lights and had a big street fair with the governor of, I think it was the governor of Ohio here to flip the switch and all that. It was a big deal for Powell. But I was beginning to tell you all this because these buildings, this row of brick here was built for the first city hall. Because when we became incorporated, then we had a mayor and a council. That was our governing body at the time. Well, when they down there were under Kimberly's sign and around the side there, but there was a hairdresser where my husband's standing, and this door went into the barber shop. And I used to go in there with my grandpa, and you must remember that in those days women didn't really go into men's barber shops, but they would put a little seat on the barber chair and set me up there, and I would get a Buster Brown. Anyway, so
Picture that.
yeah, well, it's not pretty. So anyway, that's what this building is about, and how it came about. It's fairly new, 1947.
Sharp's house.
I told you, I think many of you heard me back at the house, that I'm a sixth generation to be in Powell. And this grave right here is Joseph Gardner, who was the first burial here. And it says that he immigrated here to Ohio in 1820. 1920, we've heard it both ways, but it's in stone here. So I guess that doesn't really mean you can always believe what's written in stone. But anyway, he died in 1834. So he didn't get to live in this new little town very long. And it was actually his son, Jonathan, who became known as one of the really early pioneers of some interest. But this is my, four grandfather's grave. And, you know, I wouldn't know him if he resurrected on the spot. But when I stand here, there's a thread that runs in his family. And much of the rest of the family is back in the corner. But this is a lovely old cemetery to walk through and to read. We've brought children in here. Sometimes they go, ooh! But then we explain things to them about what some of the artwork is like. Can they find a little lamb on a stone that generally denotes a child that's born, been buried there? And Thomas Hall is here. Asa Gordon is here. Many of the people who had a lot to do with the founding and the formation of this town are here. And at the Historical Society, we sometimes get questions saying, you know, I think my grandpa might have been buried in the Powell cemetery. Do you know anything about him? And so we try to provide information for people in that regard. And we do have a lady who is a retired librarian who does genealogy work. So if you have questions or if you want to help us, we are always looking for more help. We have people who did not grow up here, don't have that lineage, but they love it now and they want to know more. So the invitation is open to you all. And come back sometime on your own. Take a look through here, this beautiful old cemetery. And one gentleman that did work with us for a while was very, very responsible for the cleanup that's gone on in here, the places that you can sit, the benches, the stone wall that was built over there to the north, and some of the bushes that were planted. And it might be fun to see too that some of the gravestones are marked by what do you call them, Stan? The brown stones from the river? Concretions. So, you know, not everybody had a lot of money for a monument. And there are probably many unmarked places here that we could find if we had the time and money. So, okay, let's head on. Trucks came out up here, and here, and here, and closed in. But this is the fire station. It was Liberty Township A. And like I said, it actually got going in 1848. And the Historical Society has in pieces the first fire truck. We need to get that put together. But at any rate, then in 1989, then the Liberty Street fire station was built, the Liberty Road, I should say. The fire station and City Hall, the Community Hall, was down there. And then the Sawmill Fire Station was built in 2004. So we have fire protection. In my day, as a teenager and child, it was all volunteer. This was very rural, lots of farmers and people who could drop everything and come running to the fire. And so it was quite a surprise to us when we started paying for these services. But we're very happy to have fire protection here. So this was the Liberty Township Fire Department, and if you all want to look at my book later on, you'll see these old pictures that show these things. And Fred Reeves, which I mentioned before, was the first fire chief. Okay, the building beside us was a grist mill, and it was built in 1900. It was also run by Henry Sharp. We have some Sharp or German relatives here from that time period, and I should tell you that this gentleman's grandfather was but he was a mayor. Thank you, Don, for coming. Okay, there also was a blacksmith shop where the next little building is. Of course, that little building is super new. And then we'll stop at the brick building just before we get to the Wine Stock's Garage. And it actually started out as a Ford dealership and then was bought out by someone who bought Chevrolets for sale. So this was the Chevrolet station, store, garage and all. And when the new cars came out, it was told that they would have big party for the coming out of the New Year's model. And so this was the party place, and kind of on those days had a grandfather, had a little band, he played in the band and everything, and they had fun here. This is where we believe that the Thomas Hall early 1850s little store, corner store, sat. And we have a picture of the building that had been here for years, which we believe was his, which was torn down when Jenny's built theirs. When I told you that he started this in the 50s, 1850s, this was also where the post office was located before we actually had a post office. I should say the mail came here because it wasn't really a post office. But we know who ran the store and who gave out the mail. And then again, the Sharp name comes up because he had the building across, he had the home across, he had things down the road, and he began to be the proprietor of this building, and it became a hardware. And for years, Don Canfield, who again is relative here to Don, and Mr. Sharp ran this building as a hardware. Well, it was then became a hardware for years after that as well. There were people by the name of Rikis who owned it, but it also was a place you could get Hannah paint. And there were traveling salesmen that came here and brought their goods and so forth. And when they tore down this building and took the siding off, they found all kinds of advertisement on the sides of the building. And so it was certainly true that it was a hardware and feed. And they actually had, it was kind of there was a place where on the side of the building where they could bring feed down and up, I guess. So we have pictures of that. So this is a very historic site that you're on, and everybody still loves it today. Okay, let's go down this way. There weren't any other churches. But actually, this building was built as a Seventh-day Adventist church. It didn't last very long, but that's what it was to begin with. We have pictures of it with a little steeple. And later, it was after it was no longer a church, it just became a residence. And I will tell you that just like the craft beer place who said the depot was in its building, there was an urban legend here where they said that there was a tunnel under the ground that ran from this house to the Martin Perry house as an underground railroad station. No, folks, this building wasn't even built till long after liberation, and it is not true that it was that, and neither was our building. It was at 1889. So sometimes you have to question what you hear. Right here, in 1900, there was I guess it was called a tile and brick kiln and business that was located back Lincoln Street, which is beyond west of the railroad tracks, a little street that goes to the north, and back in that area there was this block and kiln, this brick kiln, and there are 3 houses yet today that are built with those blocks. This is one of them, and there's one on Scioto Street, and there's one on the Scioto River. So this is kind of unusual to have this block that this house is made out of, and it is historic and local. We started on South Liberty at a school, and we're ending at the Monument on the Hill site, which was the culmination of a lot of work to get a building that was with all children under one roof, but in separate rooms. This was the Powell High School, and it sat where the parking lot is, right there at the top of the hill. And this is where 4 generations of my family went to school. And I only lived 4 houses east of here, so this was my year-round playground. And I will tell you that in 1911, the building was built and opened for its first high school class. My grandmother was a senior that year and got to be in the very first graduating class. There were 5 kids, 3 guys and 2 girls. And the picture that we have in the Historical Society shows the administrator and the teacher. So it looks like 8, but it's not. Or 7, whatever. I went to Powell School. I don't know how to do arithmetic. So anyway, it was built and at the top there, and everybody was so excited about it that they called it the Monument on the Hill, because it was one of the first ones basically in the state that incorporated all kids under one roof. That is what the article in the paper said about it. I'm not 100% sure of it, but that's what it said. So through the years, we went to school there. By the time I was in the 8th grade, Olentangy High School, the first Olentangy High School on Shanahan Road, had been built, and that was its first operating year was 1953, so the graduates were 1954 of the first Olentangy School. And then later, my daughter went to kindergarten and first grade there, and I didn't tell you that my mother graduated in 1944 from there, so 4 generations of us had graduated from this school. It was a sad day to me when they tore it down. We have a brick in the Historical Society, just like we have that slab at the Christmas tree, to remember it by. And this hill was the best sliding hill in all of Powell. And there was, the creek down here was much larger. It is said that when my mother went to school here, at recess, they were allowed to bring their skates and skate on it. Never be allowed to do that today. But anyway, we have lots of school pictures, lots of graduating class pictures. We know a lot about the teachers. We're gathering stuff all the time. We even have some yearbook albums and so forth. So if you're ever interested in anything about the school, you can come to us about it. It was torn down in 1977. And I have a picture of it coming down. And as I recall, they dug a big hole and kind of imploded it into the hole. So it's still there, but you can't see it anymore. You can't go there anymore. And the reason they closed it, a couple reasons, were that it was coal heated. And that's very dirty and messy. And also the boys' restroom, you had to go out of the building and around and down some steps and back into the basement to go to the bathroom. So that wasn't so great. The gymnasium that we thought was huge and wonderful when we come back as, adults, is just tiny. And how could we have ever played basketball there? But at any rate, it was a great place. And my great-grandfather sold the property for the building to be built. Later he sold a little bit more that direction. Learned to drive on the ball diamond back there. And great memories of Powell High School. Or Powell School wasn't high school for me. Okay, I graduated from Olentangy. The original, like the Ohio State. Anyway, so ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of the tour. I invite you to come back to the house for cookies or a drink or whatever. I will thank you again for joining us. I will again give you disclaimers that some of this information may have been a little off, and it may have evoked some more questions. So we're there to help you answer or research with you about it. And may I be as brazen as to say we don't receive any money from the town, trustees, commissioners. It's only by membership. And we're small and we struggle. So if you have it in your heart to throw a couple dollars into the donation jar, if you enjoyed this, we would very much appreciate it. Thank you very much.